Hello and welcome to a Stronghold Kingdoms beginner tutorial. Now, a few weeks back I covered castle basics, defending and the like, but I figured I would do another basic tutorial, this time covering the economy. So here I am. This is a screen that most new players will be familiar with. You get to manually select your village location. Simply click on any of the available green or orange dots and you'll be able to join, well, green, orange, or red, and you'll be able to join that county. The game might take a little bit to find an available village slot, but it should eventually do it, unless you're me. Okay, so here you are with your first village. Now there will be a tutorial that'll walk you through the basics of building up this village. Unfortunately, I already did the tutorial, so you won't see that. But what I'm going to explain here are some things that the tutorial really doesn't cover, or it doesn't cover as in depth as it should. Now, when you start off, you can see you have just a couple of buildings. One is the stockpile, where the majority of your base goods are stored, and the other is the granary, where all your food is going to be stored. In addition to these two stockpiles, there's also the village hall, which holds resources such as banqueting goods. There's also a fourth storage building called the inn, which stores the ale that you produce for your peasants to consume. Now, the economy of Stronghold Kingdoms is a little bit more in depth than your average RTS MMO, but at the same time it doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of depth as something like the Settlers would have when it comes to production chains. And also, if you're familiar with older Stronghold games, you will probably notice that there are a few different resources in the game in the Stronghold Kingdoms version of the game, as well as some of the supply chains, such as bread, have been simplified. And this is generally for convenience and expediency. You're not going to have many buildings unlocked from the start. Very basic food types. You can harvest stone and wood. You won't be able to produce any weapons or any honor goods, and you can build a hovel. So now, talking about how to really leverage an early game economy. The first approach, or the approach I usually go for, which has a very big return for the small amount invested, is by building apple orchards. And the reason for doing this is you can easily max out the research for orchard management, which will allow you to produce a lot of apples to keep your peasants fed. Because food is important. If you don't have food to feed your peasants, you're going to go into some serious negative popularity. For example, right here I have rations turned off. And when you go into negative popularity, just a second, your peasants are going to leave. Now, there is a limit to how many peasants can leave. All but 4 peasants can eventually abandon your village if you are too unpopular. So obviously you're going to want to maintain at least a decent popularity in your villages. Now, as popularity increases, your villages will arrive at the village faster. Now, the maximum number of villagers that your village can support is dependent entirely on the amount of housing capacity you've placed in the village. For example, right now I'm looking at this hovel. If I place it right next to the village hall, I'm going to get an additional 12 housing space for more peasants. Now, if I move it away further from the hall, it's going to be reduced, which is why a lot of the times you'll try to build your hovels as near to the village hall as possible, because hovels are limited in number. So it really does no good to have them moved all the way out here. Now, this, when you're first starting out, you have a premium token, and the premium token does allow you to actually move buildings about as you want. So be careful that when this premium token expires, which is 24 hours after it's first put into play during the tutorial, your buildings will essentially be locked down until you get another premium token in play to move them again. So if you don't have them in a good place when that token runs out, you can essentially, you can be put in a little bit of a inconvenient place. So that is why I recommend, if you do happen to move the hovels out further from the village hall, for instance, if you really don't have enough food to start feeding maybe an additional 10 peasants at a time, or 12 peasants at a time, and you move them out here, make sure you move them back before that premium token expires, unless you want to sort of find another premium token to play. You can either get them for free or pay for them, but it is a slight inconvenience if you're just starting off. You might not understand why all of a sudden your buildings can't be moved. And the same goes for resources such as apples. You want to place them as near to the granary as possible. If you place the apples way over here, you're going to be making significantly less from that orchard than if you had placed it right next to the granary. When it comes to industry buildings such as woodcutters' huts and stone quarries, you'll ideally want to place them as close to the stockpile as possible. Now, can be a bit of a challenge depending upon the village type that you have. Everybody starts with a lowland village, and it is relatively easy to place both woodcutters' huts and stone quarries near to the stockpile. This does not, however, hold true for other village types, but since you won't be getting your second village for at least 10 days, I would say, for your average player, this really shouldn't be a concern for a beginner video such as this. We will continue analyzing the lowland village layout. Now, the importance of wood and stone cannot be underestimated, and while you start the game with only 6,000 of each, you're going to need to make more if you want your villages to grow properly. And this includes research into relevant technologies to increase your stockpile capacity, such as engineering. Because when you first start the game, your stockpile capacity is limited to 6,000 of each industry resource. And there are 4 industry resources, but only 2 of them are used to build the majority of buildings. So once you have the basics covered, such as a decent production of stone and wood coming in, as well as enough food to feed your peasants, at least ×1 rations, you might want to start thinking about branching out and building some more exotic types of buildings. And I'm going to switch over to a more developed world to show you some of those buildings and how they can be put into play. And keep in mind that you will need to complete relevant research to access these buildings, but I feel that is important all the same, for a beginner to understand what you're really looking to create. Now, there is an efficient way to lay out village buildings, and there is an inefficient way. If you can actually match the entire village, has a grid superimposed upon it, but you can't see it. If you can figure out how to lay down your village buildings in a way that they sort of nest together, you're going to conserve more space, and you can end up ultimately with villages such as this. Now, some of the buildings have been destroyed in here from AI attacks, but as you can see, once you nest your buildings in your villages together quite efficiently, you're going to be able to fit them a lot more in there. And this brings up an important point about how to most efficiently place buildings. Now, there are some buildings that are bigger than other buildings, and although you won't have access to them early on, they are important to buildings nonetheless. In this case, it is the cathedral. Now, the cathedral would normally take up a good deal of space in a village, but if you move it off to the corner, you can see by sticking it in this corner, you're going to be hiding around 1/3 to half of the actual building size in your village. And this applies to other rather large buildings, such as the wheat farm. You can't build a wheat farm in a highland village, so I can't show you that here, but as with any building, you can stick it off to the edge. Any building that's big, it's recommended that you actually place it off to the edge instead of right inside of your village. One thing I see beginning players do frequently is place both the granary and the stockpile right next to the keep. This is ultimately a bad idea because you're going to need that space around the keep for things such as hovels and honor-producing buildings. So if I wanted to have my full housing capacity down, I'd place all these hovels down so I can have as many peasants in this village as possible. I'm going to need this space right around the keep, and therefore that space around the keep has a high premium on it. In a similar vein, I would not put the market near the keep. I've also seen in the villages that I've captured from players who just started the game, they'll put the market right next to the keep, either due to a sense that buildings closer to the keep won't get destroyed as easily, or they think it's more efficient. That simply doesn't happen with the market. The market is largely a throwaway building. You can just place it wherever there is space because it really doesn't have any interaction with the rest of the economy inside the village. And that really does bring up an important thing to note, is that the buildings inside your village are all protected from all but one attack, and that attack is carried out in the castle. So even if somebody attacks your village with a special village damaging attack called a ransack, you're not actually going to be losing any buildings based upon where they are. It seems ultimately random. Some people have speculated that the buildings closer to the edges are more likely to get removed, but I haven't seen any hard data to absolutely back this claim up. As far as I'm concerned, any building in your village is equally likely to be targeted by the ransack, which means that when you're first building your village, you can really exercise as much expansion is really you want. You shouldn't feel compelled to only build right around the keep. You should really try to expand as far out as possible, depending upon what's the most efficient layout for your village type. In this case, I'm in a highland village, so it's going to be slightly different from a lowland village, but here we go back to a lowland village, which is what players initially see when they're first starting the game. This is the default village type, as I've mentioned before. When you're building certain buildings for honor generation, passive honor generation, such as the flower beds, you can put them behind other buildings, and this can be a problem when you want to access them later. For example, if I build this formal garden right behind my jester's court, once it is complete, I will no longer be able to easily select it. And you can select it by holding the shift key on your keyboard, and this will cause any building that you hover over to become transparent, so you can select buildings behind it. In this case, I wanted to select the formal gardens. I'm holding that shift key down, and then I click on the formal gardens that you can see right behind it, and I can now delete the building. This is a very common question that I see new players get stumped by, is how to access those buildings that are built behind larger buildings. I mean, this could actually apply to a scenario where you've built, say, your cathedral in front of some important building, such as your granary, and you want to access the granary. Suppose I put the cathedral there. Once it's completed, you'll no longer be able to see the granary, and the only way to make the cathedral invisible again, so you can click the granary behind it, is actually by holding down the shift key. If holding down the shift key does not make your building that you're mousing over invisible, try restarting the game. This happens from time to time, especially if you're switching in and out of worlds a lot. There can become a bug. A bug can crop up that causes the game to stop registering that keystroke, it seems like. So as you can see with this village, it is a little bit more developed. It sort of gives you an idea of the economy you could start running. I have my my bakery off to the side here, so half of it can hang off of my actual village map, thereby saving me space. These smaller food production buildings are also going around the granary. Right now the granary is a little bit further away from some of these other buildings, but as I build more food production buildings, it's going to be rounded out a bit more. And as you can see, I've left plenty of space to expand my food production without interfering with other production, such as buildings that I'd put around my keep for honor production or population increase, entertainment buildings which increase the popularity of my village, or my ale production over here. Also, you may note that while my food production buildings are near to the forest here, you can see the trees, they're not near to this forest over here where I'm going to be doing the bulk of my wood production in a lowland village. It is very rare you're actually going to be building many, if any, woodcutters' huts over here, even if you place them all down. They should all fit on this section of woods or trees. As far as the stone goes now, in a lowland village, the stone is usually in short supply because there isn't a whole lot of stone accessible to you. But if you place them down optimally, such as this pattern that I have going right here, you're going to be able to fit more stone cutters or stone quarries in than if you start placing them haphazardly. And this really comes down to efficiency, like I've mentioned before. You're really going to want to look into this if you want to have your stone quarries laid out in any real efficient manner. In my first villages, I made the mistake of not doing this, and you'll see a lot of gaps. Let's say maybe it would be a gap like that, where it could have been much closer to the actual stone quarry that was placing it nearby, but I didn't optimize it. And also I encounter an issue when I want to place my cathedral. A lot of the time I'll want to place my cathedral in the corner for either the stone or the iron, and this does remove a good amount of potential for either stone or iron production in the lowland village, which means you might want to reconsider placing it somewhere else. The churches in the lowland village type can be placed on the top corner, but the cathedral won't fit up there. And of course it's not going to fit in the corner with the woods or the forest either. So that is ultimately a call that you're going to have to make. Personally, I usually sacrifice the stone in return for additional village space, because that village space it can be quite valuable as you build your villages up. But you know, it's a call that I'm going to leave up to you. If you really need the stone at the time, such as early in the game when you're building the castle, for example, I could definitely see you putting it just anywhere in the village. So please don't take my recommendation about putting large buildings such as the cathedral in the corner as canon, where you can't ever deviate from that practice. There are situations where it might be practical to not do so. I don't think I've really covered ale yet. Like all other stockpile buildings, such as the stockpile, the granary, the keep, and now finally the inn, you cannot actually delete these buildings. Once they're placed, they're permanent, unless you have a premium token in play, in which case you can actually move them around the place. This is really only a problem when it comes to the inn. Now, when most players start the game, the stockpile and the granary are both placed, as well as the village hall. But the inn itself is not researched, so until you research it, you're not going to be able to place one down, and this can lead to a problem where players who research it then put it next to the village hall. I've seen them do that, and you really shouldn't, because as I've mentioned before, the space around the village hall comes at a premium because there is an ideal range here for both peasant population and honor generation. In this case, I've put the inn over here in the corner, which is away from my stockpile and away from my granary, so it gives me some room to expand decently. I could easily put probably 8 or 9 breweries surrounding it and still not really get in the way of any of my other buildings. Now here is a village that is very near to completion, and this is really what I consider your ideal objective when creating a lowland village. Now there are some buildings missing that I need to rebuild because, as I showed you the other village, the AI tears them down from time to time, and the same can happen with players who are ransacking you. But by and large, you're not losing many village buildings considering the number that I have in here. You'll notice the layout in this case is a little bit different, with the inn over here on the left side of the map, and all this space over here occupied by weapon workshops. I do make a lot of weapons in this world. I'm currently ranked at weaponsmith number 10, so you know, out of about 1,500 players, I'm making a fair amount of weapons. And this is because I have a very efficient layout here. My weapon buildings are not helter-skelter whatsoever. It may look a little messed up because there are some missing, but once we fill in all those blank spaces, as you can see, it will look very professional, very organized. And I also, in this village, as I was talking about, I have my cathedral in the corner, sacrificing some of my stone production, but at the same time giving me a lot more room to fit in additional food buildings and weapon workshops. When it comes to surrounding my keep, I really have prioritized passive honor here. You can prioritize housing capacity by putting them nearer to the keep than these little statues, but in this case that is not really the playstyle I was going for. But as you can see, it is important that that's the ideal amount of space that you'll need to save around your keep. This is right here is the ideal amount of space you'll want to save around your inn, and this is the ideal amount of space you'll need around your stockpile. This is what a very fleshed out village will look like. With the stockpile placed here, you might notice that it's not nearly as close to my woodcutters' huts as in my other villages, or it's nowhere near as close to the woodcutters' huts as when you start out with your default village. But by moving it into this position here, not only does it give better access, a more balanced access for all of the weapons workshops to the stockpile, because they need to go there to get the goods to make their weapons, but also it's nearer to the iron mines, which means you're going to have a much higher flow of iron coming into your village. And to be honest, iron production in a lowland village is at a higher premium than wood production. But then again, this is all getting into a more endgame setup. But I think it is important to give you an idea of the kind of village build that you're looking for, because without a layout, without a pattern to go on, it's hard to really envision what you're going to do with all that space when the buildings become available to you. So yeah, I hope for any beginning players you found this helpful. To any experienced players watching this, if you think I omitted anything, please let me know in the comments section below this video. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.